Well, say what you will about the Disney era of Star Wars. One thing cannot be denied. It has been successful in bringing in a new generation of Star Wars fans. And that's why today's conversation is so interesting. I'm joined by Pete Fletzer of Around the Galaxy to talk about growing up with a Star Wars dad and then becoming one himself.
It's true. All of it.
What is the name of the Porg on the Millennium Falcon?
Force is strong in my family.
What do you think his name is? It's a big moment.
I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
Maybe Turbis?
Do or do not. There is no try.
Turbis? Pablo, if you're listening to this live stream, that Porg's name is now Turbis. It's a good Star Wars name.
We're not done yet.
These guys recorded an awesome podcast called Tatooine Sons. Everybody was lit.
Welcome to Tatooine Sons, the only fan podcast to name an official Star Wars creature and be endorsed by the writer-director of The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson. We believe that pop culture is the mythology of this generation, that there is a story, it is written on our souls, and that these myths speak to that story. And that is why I am honored to be joined this week by my good friend, Pete Fletzer. Pete Fletzer is a freelance writer. He was best known for his work in the mid-90s for Lucasfilm and Topps Star Wars Galaxy and Star Wars Insider magazines. He was discovered by Steve Sansweet, and he wrote content about toys and collectibles, unique fan stories, and New York area Star Wars movie premieres. He was right in the thick of the Star Wars resurgence at the turn of the century. He was covering events like the special editions in 1997 and all three prequel premieres. He authored almost 200 Star Wars questions for the amazing science fiction and horror trivia game. And then in the early 2000s, Pete stepped away from writing and disappeared from the public eye other than maybe issuing an occasional blog post. In 2019, he released his mammoth full-length fan fiction novelization of the Phantom Menace called Duel of the Fates. Pete's an accomplished voiceover artist. Pete can be heard weekly on his podcasts called Around the Galaxy and Disturbances in the Force. And all that's really cool. But I'm most excited to have Pete on the show this week because he's truly become a friend. He is a positive force in a Star Wars fandom that needs more voices like his. I've known Pete for several years now, but I've never asked him the question that we kicked things off with.
Why do I love Star Wars so much? It's a great question. I think because, the first part is it's an appealing story at the most base level, right? It's this story of family and excitement and action and wizards and magic and all that good stuff. So at its base, that's what it is, and it pulls me in. But I think what I found over the 44 years since it came out, that it's an opportunity to connect with family, both to my father and to my kids. And so there's that constant connection there that is so critical and so interesting to me.
You mentioned it helping you connect with kids, which obviously everybody that listens to this show knows that that's a huge deal for me. But I'm curious to hear how it helped you connect with your dad, because my dad wasn't into Star Wars. My dad hated Star Wars, had nothing to do with it. So we never had that type of connection. How did Star Wars function within your relationship with your father?
Yeah, it's fun because, my dad actually introduced me to Universal horror movies. And I remember watching, Godzilla movies with him and black and white science fiction movies. And so my dad was always into sci-fi and monster movies and things like that. And so it was sort of a natural when Star Wars came out. We actually didn't see it till the end of the summer, the first year that it was out. And, but it was I was the prime age. I was 7 years old and he took us to see the movie, and it just became something that like most Star Wars fans, like the first time you see it, it's ingrained in everything that is about you. But what was great, it was really kind of one of the first movies that I think I kind of remember me and my dad just talking about and really engaging in, and actually probably more than New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, because I was 10 years old when that came out. And I remember very much the end of Empire, the I am your father moment. And I don't remember the moment itself, but what I do remember, what I have vivid memories of, is talking with my dad about, he's asking me, what do you think? Do you think Vader really is his father? Do you think it's a ploy? What's going to happen to Han Solo? Are they going to find him? And is Lando going to be a good guy? And so is Luke going to, get the girl? Because that was still an option at the end of Empire Strikes Back. So, but I remember, and it's funny because ever since then, and I'm very fortunate, my father's still with us. We connect regularly on movies, and some of my favorite memories with my dad are just, going on a long car ride and we talk about a movie. And so that's really been something that I've considered sort of this underlying bed of what Star Wars has meant to me, and whether I think about it or not, or talk about it or not, it's absolutely that connection. And then he was responsible for driving me to pursue writing. I had a passion for it, and they had their amazing science fiction and horror trivia game. That was the trademark name back in the 90s. And part of his marketing campaign, it was the 90s, so it was pre-email and pre-internet and websites and social media. So he did a newsletter, and I covered Star Wars. And as you can imagine, 1994, 95, there was no Star Wars really. So it caused me to really get into it. And he urged me to pursue writing as something that I really enjoyed doing, and kind of gave me that lesson that if you love it, do it,
That's awesome. You mentioned your dad was the one that kind of introduced you to Star Wars. Was it the movies that just drew you in, and were you an instant Star Wars fan as a result, and it was a part of your life, kind of going forward from that? Or was there something else that helped kind of really seal the deal for you? What was it that brought you in after you saw the movies? Was there more to it than that?
I think it was my dad, and I've said this before, and it's interesting because looking back on my childhood, I mean, Star Wars was 77. We all know kind of the late 70s and early 80s were, a difficult economic time for the country. And I do remember that my dad, was in and out of work and things like that at times. And he always somehow came home with this small little Star Wars toy or something, or a magazine, a Starlog magazine that had an image of Star Wars on it. And so there was that connection, that sort of that tangible connection that he was able to, kind of kept our interest during the years between movies and things. And so I think there was that sort of tangibility. And it's always interesting because I sometimes on my show, I'll talk to my guests about, there's something about Star Wars, you want to own a piece of it, whether it's an action figure or a helmet or something, and you want to be a part of it. And so my dad was able to kind of bring me along for the ride, even with, I think more than anything else, it was, the different science fiction magazines that covered it, and just, a little $1.99 magazine that we could both sit on the couch and dig through the pages and look at the color pictures of Luke and Leia and the Millennium Falcon, that just kind of, it made me want to connect to that world so much more. And so, yeah, I mean, it's such an interesting reflection because media is consumed so much differently now. We looked for any sort of, if we saw, a Mad Magazine was a Star Wars issue. And so I grabbed that, anything that had Star Wars on it, the behind the scenes kind of TV shows at the time, anything that had any sort of reference to Star Wars was a big deal to me. So yeah, I think that might be it.
Was there ever a time that you felt disconnected from Star Wars?
Yeah, I think in that time between, like a lot of us did, between Jedi and Dark Empire or the Heir to the Empire as well, there was that bit of time. But I was always the Star Wars fan. I mean, me and my best friend growing up, we always had some sort of a Star Wars connection. But I don't really feel like I ever completely let it go. Even when others were letting it go, I still had the t-shirts and the books and I had my toys that I wish I still had. I don't know what happened to them, but I always had that kind of thing. But actually, I think one of the reasons why Star Wars has stuck with me so much is because I frankly was the right age to separate from it and the right age to come back to it. I mean, when you're 13 years old, when Jedi is over, Return of the Jedi is over, I'm 13. So, it's, whatever the blockbuster movie isn't the cool thing to do. And then when things started coming back in the 90s, I was in my 20s. And so it felt kind of natural to go back to pursue something that and rediscover something you loved as a kid. So I was never completely separated, but yeah, I went through the dark times that everybody else did, I think.
What do you remember the moment you heard that Lucas was making a prequel trilogy for real, and not just the rumors about it that had gone on for years, but it was officially happening? The trailer was getting ready to release, or Liam Neeson was cast and all this kind of stuff. Do you remember that moment? And what was it like for you as an original trilogy Star Wars fan getting that experience again?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I was starting to get back into Star Wars because of my dad's game, which was in the mid 90s. And there were rumblings, as you said, we all kind of heard it was going to happen. And I actually had one of the first Star Wars fan websites. It was called Echo Base. And it was a GeoCities site or something like that. That's how old it was.
That's awesome.
Dial-up modem and, the logos with the flames and all those things. And, but people started asking me because they thought I was an official, or at least had the most connection to Star Wars. And so, but I do remember it. And I think I remember all the, because there were so many different websites that were quote unquote leaking stuff and getting information, which, it was all, most of it was all wrong. But I do remember the trailer, and I do remember, and in fact, I think you talked about it recently, the people buying tickets to see The Curious Case of Benjamin Button just to go see the trailer. And I think when I think back to the Phantom Menace trailer, I think about when it was, I remember people had posted like some screen grabs of it when it first was available. I don't even remember where it was. And I was downloading it, and it was such a huge file because it was dial up. And I mean, the world we have now for video is just insane. But I remember I started the download before I went to bed because I was going to wake up and I was going to have it. And I woke up and there was some, blip in the system. And so it wasn't there. So that's my first thought. Whenever I think of the Phantom Menace trailer, I think of that. And of course I think of that opening fog scene with the, I guess it was the Kadu or whatever they were called, the creatures coming through with the Gungans on them coming through the fog. But yeah, no, the first thought is always that, oh my God, I went to bed and I expected to see this and it's not there.
Wow.
So, yeah.
That's awesome. What was we've talked a little bit about this before, but I'm curious to get some more conversation about it. Your thoughts on the prequels when they were actually happening.
Yeah, I have regularly admitted that I was not a fan of the prequels. And it's so funny to listen to the conversation now where the prequels are beloved and they're seen as classics, because I may have told the story before to you, and I apologize if it's a repeat, but I was lucky because I was doing the work for Star Wars Galaxy magazine. I had the opportunities to get to all three prequel premieres in New York City. And I was so hyped for the Phantom Menace, as we all were, because it was we've been waiting for this forever. And it was this star-studded event. It was like, Macaulay Culkin was there, and Donald Trump and Natalie Portman, like everybody who was in New York City was at this event. And as I was walking out of the theater, I didn't know what to wear to a movie premiere, especially in New York, right? I mean, I was a 20-something-year-old guy. And so I wore a suit. I mean, I don't know. I looked more like a lawyer than a Star Wars fan. And as I'm walking out of the theater, I look behind me and Christian Slater is right behind me. And it was interesting because when the movie started, I can remember there was you could almost feel a physical letdown when the movie first started, because there was the stereotypical sort of almost Asian sounding Nemoidians. There was this opening crawl about taxation routes. And I remember literally thinking to myself, am I seeing the movie, or is this some sort of like gag? And then they're going to show the real movie. So there was this weird sort of, anticipation and letdown. So as I'm walking out of the theater, back to that, because all of us were like, what did we just see? And I turned to Christian Slater because I was a fan, and I'm like, when am I going to talk to Christian Slater again? So I said, Christian, what did you think of the movie? And he looks at this guy in a suit, right? So he doesn't know who I am. He's looking at me, and I could tell he's like, do I know who this person is? Should I know who it is? He called me Christian. So it's like he talked like he knew me, and he just looks at me and he goes, visually stunning. Right. That was his entire comment. And, but my personal takeaway was I was disappointed, and it's amazing how revisionist history has everybody forgetting about things like, the people versus George Lucas, and George ruined my childhood. Everything they're saying about the sequels was being said then. And I'm not proud to say it, but I was in that group of, George, why are you doing this? And, it's amazing how I have absolutely come around, and now I love the Phantom Menace. It's weird to say that. If you told me 20 years ago I would say that, I wouldn't have believed you. But I love watching that movie. I love everything about it now. But it was a difficult slog. Attack of the Clones was a little bit better in my mind, but I felt like it was missing something. I remember going to Revenge of the Sith and being like, okay, that felt a little bit more like what I was expecting, but it's still, I mean, honestly, we can say whatever we want, but, there's this recent love of Hayden Christensen, but we didn't love him back then. And I hate to remind people of that, but like, he just felt like it was flat. It was all the things that we didn't want for whatever reason. But again, in hindsight, they've evolved. So my personal take was, I was like, I guess they were okay. And it's funny, over years, you're like, oh no, actually it wasn't bad, to now where I'm like, put them on, let's watch them. So
why do you think that that's changed in 15, 20 years? Why do you think, obviously the films are the same films that were in place. Is it the other content that surrounded the characters and the storylines and sort of filled in the gaps? Is it just distance from and sort of the nostalgia of being able to see these films in theaters in 99 and those years comes back to you, or is it that that's changed?
Yeah, I think there's three elements to that. I think number one is, it's nostalgia. I mean, I look back at that, and 1999 is not 4 years ago anymore. It's 20 something years ago. So you look back at those memories, and it kind of takes you back. I think that's what I love about watching Phantom Menace, is it takes me back to the late 90s. It takes me back to a different time in my life. I think secondly is, you have to give credit where credit's due for Clone Wars and as a series, and the gaps that it filled in, and it made you sort of fill those stories a little bit more with a little bit more gravity to what was going on, because we got that story. But if I think about it, a lot of it has to do with the current fan base. Being actively involved in the fan base, as I am, as you are. I think the fact that so many fans grew up with the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, and they love them. They love them the way my kids love the sequel trilogy. And to feel that love, it makes you kind of, if you're a human being, if there's something you don't like if you go out to dinner with somebody, and, a great example is Indian food. I'm not a fan of Indian food. I've never been a fan of Indian food, but I went to dinner with somebody who is not only an Indian food expert, but an Indian food fan. And I tried it, and I was like, you know what? It's not that bad. I had one bad experience, but it's really not terrible. And so it's that same kind of thing. I think it's being surrounded by people who love that trilogy, whether it's because of Clone Wars or whether it's because it's their first movie experience. It makes you kind of appreciate them differently. And again, I think as a father who takes things in, differently the way my kids take them, if friends of mine or people I've gotten to know have a different opinion. I think it's just sort of it's being a good-natured human being to go, okay, let's think about it, let's take a look at it. And that coupled with the nostalgia and coupled with the stories that we got for 7 seasons of Clone Wars, they're different movies now. So and I don't know if it's me that's changed so much as it's the way I look at it has changed.
I love how Pete is willing to admit something that a lot of older fans kind of want to forget or even deny. He didn't like the prequels when they were released. But it's also awesome to hear Pete share how a little bit of time and a lot of perspective have helped him to not only come to appreciate episodes 1 through 3, but even learn to really enjoy them. My interview with Pete will continue in just a moment, but I want to take just a minute to thank our sponsor, cufflinks.com. This past Sunday, I was given the honor of delivering the sermon at church. I'm not usually that nervous about public speaking, but this week I was. There's something different about speaking in your own church. And I really, really wanted to wear my Turbis the Porg cufflinks from cufflinks.com for an added boost of confidence. That whole look good, feel good thing. Unfortunately, I don't have a white French cuff shirt that works with those, so I had to push through on my own, and what a bummer that is. If you're not familiar with cufflinks.com, all you need to know is that they have over 3,000 items for the sharp-dressed fan, including cufflinks, ties, tie bars, and socks from all of the fandoms you love, like Star Wars and Star Trek and Marvel and DC and Lord of the Rings and more, and sporting leagues, NFL, NBA, Major League Baseball, all of it. We love cufflinks.com because they're family owned. They're run by a couple of brothers who geek out about Star Wars as much as we do. And that's it. So if you want to help the show and you want to look great doing it, head on over to cufflinks.com. Take a look at everything it has to offer. Go ahead and get your Christmas list together. Give that to your family. And make sure that you tell them to use Tatooine 15 at the checkout so that you can receive 15% off the entire order. Maybe Pete would have enjoyed the red carpet premieres of the prequel trilogy better if cufflinks.com had been around to help him get a great Star Wars tie or socks or something like that. Who knows? It's impossible to have a conversation about changing your mind on the prequels without thinking about how many people dislike the sequel trilogy. I asked Pete what he thinks about those recent entries into the Star Wars universe.
So The Force Awakens to me was the perfect way to get us back into Star Wars. And for all the commentary about it being a New Hope reboot, 100% it was. And in fact, there's like shot for shot, you can find certain things that are pulled directly from it. But at that time, and to this day, I still consider J.J. Abrams the king of reboots. And so instead of having Luke and Han and Leia, he created a different group of characters and told the same story, essentially, which was great. And I loved The Force Awakens. I loved everything about it. Yes, did I roll my eyes when they were going to blow up another super weapon? Absolutely. But come on, it was Star Wars. That's cool. I love that. So, I've always been a fan of The Force Awakens. It always is something that if I'm flipping through the channels and it's one of those weekends where TNT or TBS is showing it, I'll stop. There goes an hour or two of my day. I'll be pulled in. And I loved it. And I was so excited to see where The Last Jedi was going to go. And now The Last Jedi has since become, I'll preface this, one of my favorite Star Wars stories. And the other thing that I say a lot about The Last Jedi is it's not a movie I watch a lot because there's a lot going on. There's a lot of emotion. It's a draining movie, but
it's not a light Star Wars romp, fantasy celebration fan thing.
Right. I mean, if you think about when you ask why I love Star Wars, it wasn't because I said it was because it's this fun story. That being said, it is without a doubt one of the best written Star Wars stories. It's one of the best of all the Star Wars stories. But I remember walking out of, so all the major tentpole movies up until pandemic. Me and my neighbor across the street, he's got kids the same age as mine. We would go on the Thursday. We would leave all the kids home, and that way we could go see, you know, whether it was a Marvel movie or Star Wars. And we went to go see Last Jedi, and we both walked out of the movie in silence. And my first comment was that was both the best and worst Star Wars movie I ever saw. And it's because it's a lot to take in. And my other thought about the Last Jedi is it felt like they could have ended the series there, right? Because it ended on that classic Star Wars defeat with hope, right? And that's exactly what it was. It was defeat with hope. It was, you know, Leia and Rey, and we were fine. But the more I went back and I thought about it, and I watched it several times again and really realized that it's a pure Star Wars story. And much like The Empire Strikes Back, The Last Jedi needs to get much more credit than it does for expanding the lore of Star Wars and expanding how the Force works and how things in that universe exist. And I always say I love The Empire Strikes Back. It's my favorite of all the Star Wars movies. But without it, you don't get Force Ghost. You don't get Force telekinesis. You don't get that ability to talk across, you know, or to speak to each other through your mind across vasts of space. And Last Jedi did that. My other comment, and probably the last comment I'll make on Last Jedi about this is I have since gone on to say that I believe that Rian Johnson is a Star Wars fan and J.J. Abrams is a Star Wars movie fan, because J.J. makes beautiful, high octane movies. And Force Awakens was that. And The Last Jedi understood Star Wars, I think, better than many, many Star Wars films. In fact, I think I tweeted recently that to me, it understands Star Wars better than just about any other Star Wars movie there is. And then my honest appraisal of The Rise of Skywalker is I'm still disappointed by it to this day. And I think because there were so many eggs put in that basket as the number 9 in the saga, it literally had an impossible task. And there were times where I was blaming JJ and I was blaming the lack of planning and all the things that are legitimate arguments. But at the end of the day, it's impossible to stick that landing. No, but nothing they could have done would have made everybody happy. I feel like there's a lot of missed opportunities, a lot of simple connections that could have been made. But at the end of the day, it's a, you know, I heard you guys say recently, you know, it's Star Wars, so I like it. And while I love that phrase, I think it's important to remember that you don't have to like everything. And I think that becomes this weird sort of, we see it on social media a lot. In fact, that's why I don't talk about Rise of Skywalker a lot on social media, because I only have 280 characters and I can't preface it by saying, but I still love it, you know? But yeah, I just felt like Rise of Skywalker had some missed opportunities in it that, you know, end of the day, it's still a very cool movie. It's still a lot of fun. I mean, I probably would watch that before Last Jedi if I wanted to pop some popcorn and sit in the family room, because it's much more of that kind of a movie. I have a funny little story that I don't think I've shared before. When we saw the Rise of Skywalker, we had a Homer Simpson moment. I took my daughter, my friend across the street took his daughter, his oldest daughter, and 4 of us went to the movie on opening night. And we're walking out of the theater and there's the line of people waiting to get in the theater we just came out of. And my daughter blurts out, "So wait a minute, how is she Palpatine's granddaughter?" And I was like, "Oh my God, come on, Lo, let's go. And I had to hush her and rush her out the door. I was like, my goodness.
That's awesome. How did you introduce your kids to Star Wars? What was the way that you did that?
It's funny. My daughter has always been, she was for a long time, she was a Disney princess girl and she loved all that stuff. And I tried to talk her into the fact that, you know, hey, Princess Leia is a Disney princess now. And it took a couple, you know, it's funny. It took a couple viewings for her to get through, and because it wasn't her style. But interestingly, as soon as she saw Rey, and I guess she was, what was that, 2015, we started seeing pictures of her. So my daughter was 5 or 6 years old. She gravitated to her. In fact, she was such a Disney princess fan. She used to have all her little Disney princess dresses she would dress up in. She ran upstairs and made her own Rey costume, like immediately. It was so interesting to see her do that, wrapped her arms and stuff. so it was introduced just sort of through just having it on, and one of these days where it was on television, I said, oh, let's sit down and watch it. Now my son, on the other hand, he was probably a little too young. In hindsight, I'm like, I wonder if it was the right thing to do. But I have a video somewhere, and I need to find it again, where I actually videoed him watching the beginning of Star Wars, and he was again probably too young, but I have that moment on video when Vader comes into the blockade runner, and he looks at him, and he just goes, "Oh no!" Like he knew.
It was instinctive.
Yeah. But what's interesting about my son as a Star Wars fan is the movies to him are secondary, and I almost would say uninteresting to him. He is a Clone Wars, Bad Batch, Mandalorian kid. He's actually, Clone Wars is his number one thing. And it's funny how much we take for granted, right? I've put it this way to my friends. Like, I coached his Pee-wee baseball team, and it was his first baseball experience. And every kid on the team, it was their T-ball experience. And I forgot, we take for granted as, red-blooded American men, that baseball is you go to first base, second base, third base. You put kids in T-ball, they hit the ball and they just run. Like, they run to the outfield. They don't know. So I took for granted that Jack, my son, was so familiar with the Clone Wars story from the prequels. I thought it all made sense. Now, my son's my Star Wars heroes are Luke and Han and Lando and the droids. My son's Star Wars heroes are Rex, Echo, Fives, all of those guys. And when we watched season 7 of the Clone Wars, I figured he knew what was going to happen, but he didn't. And when they turned, like, I saw literal shock on his face, and I still get a little choked up thinking about it, because his heroes turned, and the line he said that I'll never forget, because it was brilliant for a kid of his age. He said, they were always shooting the robots, and now they're just robots. And I was like, wow, that's a great insight. But he was physically, like, I saw him move when it happened. And so what's great about that, I mean, here I'm saying it's just a shocking moment, but what's great about it is that was his I am your father moment, right? Because he didn't know it was coming, and it affected him that way. My daughter's I am your father moment was when we watched the prequels together before episode 9. She had never really watched them. She didn't know that Sidious and Palpatine were the same person. And when he unveiled himself to Anakin, she turned to me and she said, I knew there was something wrong with that guy. And but it's so funny. We take all that for granted. But what I love about that is, between me, my daughter, and my son, 3 completely different entries to what we love about Star Wars. And we all got our I am your father moment. And that's pretty wild to me.
It is. What are some ways that you've used Star Wars in your conversations with your kids, kind of using them as metaphors or lessons to help them with the things that they deal with, or lessons you want to teach them?
Yeah. It's funny, because I don't think it happens as directly as that, other than things like, when you see, I think Mandalorian probably gave me the best opportunities there, because there were times where, and one of the things I love about Mandalorian as a show, and I think it's underappreciated, is the lessons that Grogu is learning from Din for the first 16 episodes. He's learning that you deal with conflict. And I wouldn't teach my kids that. So it's interesting to watch that, but it's a great opportunity for me to, more than anything else, sort of ask, so what'd you think of that episode? And sometimes it's, oh, that was fun, and we kind of move on. But sometimes, you'll get questions about, this, like the most innocuous episode, the one where, I can't remember the episode number of The Mandalorian, but the one where they were springing that guy from the prison ship. It's one that nobody ever talks about, but it's one of those episodes where, afterwards my son turned to me and we talked about it, and it was talking about making decisions about your friends and following what your friends do. And even though, it's not that direct of the story, it's, he knew these people and they wanted him to do something that he knew was wrong, and was that the right thing to do? And how do you go so I think part of the challenges and part of the conversations people have is they want to be able to go directly to, so why did Anakin do that? And that does happen. And there are certainly times, we have talked about, just fun conversations and thought-provoking ones, like asking my son, would, if the Jedi came and were going to take you from the family, what would you do? How would you deal with that? And sometimes it's just, it spins into a conversation that you don't expect. I didn't expect to watch that episode of Mando and then be talking about, hey, when your friends do something they shouldn't do, how do you handle it, and using it from that direction. And Star Wars is so full of all that stuff that, and I think that's why it's important, if your kids are interested in Star Wars, to let them experience it. And, like most media, you should, I'm not going to preach, but, most media, you need to make sure your kids are watching things or engaging in things that they should. And, that's why what feels like such a natural question to your kids. And I think people think that it has to be formalized, but just to say, hey, what did you think of that episode? And sometimes it's, no, that was all right. And you never talk about it again. And sometimes it leads to great conversations. And that's what I think Star Wars does really well for parents.
Has there ever been a moment when you're having those conversations with your kids and you start having memories of conversations about Star Wars with your own dad?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, like I said at the beginning, we were talking so much about Empire and what's going to happen next. And it just brings me back when we're between episodes, especially in Mando, because Mando does leave you kind of like, I know something's coming. And, just, what I also love is because, obviously I'm a certified nerd, and, when he's like, so Daddy, where did R2D2 come from? And who, why do the stormtroopers wear that? And I can like be that's where I get to, push up my glasses and be like, oh, well, actually, son. But it's fun because it's him learning about that world. And, now if he was to ask me about NASCAR or something, I'd be like, I have no idea. Let's look it up together. But it's fun that way to be able to talk to him about those things, and which is what I did with my dad. I remember, but back then, of course, we had no answers, right? And I remember having great conversations with my dad about what we thought the Clone Wars was, because again, a throwaway line in A New Hope, which today would have been like a big flashback scene and all kinds of stuff. But we always kind of talk, what do you think the Clone Wars were, and how long ago was it, and what happened there? So it's that same kind of thing, having those conversations, and more with my son than my daughter, because my daughter she likes the stories. I think she's kind of, she's 12 now, so she's like, okay, Daddy, I'll watch it with you if you want. But my son, he does really dig it, and that's fun. And what's also cool is like I don't think I would have watched Resistance if he wasn't into it, because I tried to get into Resistance. I still don't love it. Again, as we were saying before, you don't have to love all Star Wars. It's okay. But what I love about it is he loved it, and he loved the action, and it's, at the end of the day, you forget, like, Resistance, people are like, well, it didn't really add much to the canon, and it didn't really have deep plot story things that created connections. And that was okay, because it was fun and colorful, and that's what at the time, he was 5 or 6 years old. That's what he needed and loved. And we hung out and talked about it. So that was great.
That's awesome. Last question. What's the biggest lesson that you've learned from Star Wars?
The biggest lesson as a parent, or just broadly?
Either way, whatever comes to mind.
I think the biggest lesson I've gotten from Star Wars is probably that, being a parent means sacrifice in a good way. If you look at where, again, a scene that meant very little to me originally, Phantom Menace, a movie that I blew off at 29 years old or whatever it was. When Shmi lets Anakin go, at the time I was like, oh yeah, that's nice. But now I can't watch that scene. I can't even think about it without like getting a little bit emotional, a little bit teary, because that's what it's all about. I mean, one day my kids your son just went off to college, right? And you have to build them so that they can be on their own. And again, what Yoda said in The Last Jedi, they grow, they become what they grow beyond, what is the
I can't remember. I know exactly the line you're thinking of right now, but I'm trying to remember it. So.
But it's that concept. And it's funny. I think, again, when I was 7 years old and I first saw Star Wars, it was just a fun space wizard, spaceships, explosions, action adventure. As an adult with children, it means the whole concept of family is so obvious, but it's not hitting you over the head. They never say family is this, but it's always there. It's in every piece of every story. And so I guess what I've taken is that it means sacrifice. It means doing whatever you need to for your children. And that's whether it's Vader literally dying to save his son, or having the courage to let your kid go do something that you don't love, but it's important to them and what's best for them. I think that's a super valuable lesson that I would take from the entire saga.
The quote that Pete and I were desperately trying to remember is, "We are what they grow beyond." I love that quote. I'm glad that he brought it up. All throughout Star Wars, we see these important moments when parents are willing to give up everything for the good of their children. Pete mentioned Shmi letting go of Anakin, and also Anakin later sacrificing himself for Luke. But there's also Galen Erso in Rogue One, and then who can forget Han's heart-wrenching death in The Force Awakens. Love for our children and the willingness to give up everything for them is one of the most compelling themes found in a galaxy far, far away. I want to give a big thank you to Pete Fletzer for joining me on this week's interview episode. I know I mentioned it at the top of the show, but Pete is truly one of the greatest guys in Star Wars fandom, and his shows are two of the best out there. So make sure that you listen to them and you follow Pete on all social media. To learn more about Pete and Around the Galaxy and his fan fiction retelling of episode 1 entitled Duel of the Fates, go to atgcast.com. And thank you so much for listening to Tatooine Sons, a pop culture podcast. If you enjoyed this interview, please take a moment to rate and to review the show on your podcast app of choice. Make sure you hit that follow or subscribe button on your app so that you get every episode the moment it drops. Our next episode releases on Tuesday, and honestly, we're not really that sure what we're going to be talking about yet. We just know it's going to be exciting because we are going to react to the announcements and the teasers and the behind the scenes content coming today for Disney Plus Day, if you're listening to this on the day that it releases. Anyway, it should be very interesting. Please make sure you're following Tatooine Sons on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Share this episode with somebody else. It's the best way that you can be a part of helping this show grow. I think that's going to do it for today. I think there's only one thing left to say.
May the Force be with you always.
This party's over.
I like that Wookiee.
Don't get technical with me.
Joy, please.
Yep, yep.